My name is Mariana, and I'm joined today by Gail. Hello, Gail.
Hi.
Nice to have you here. Can you please quickly introduce yourself, who you are, why you're here?
So my name's Dr. Gail Bradbrook. I'm a co-founder of a social movement that launched in 2018 called Extinction Rebellion, and it went viral. It went to 75 different countries, and it helped to change the conversation on climate change.
That sounds amazing and very interesting. And I want to ask you a lot about it. Shall we start in the beginning? Basically, I want to understand kind of how do you get into something like this? Like when and why you kind of got interested in activism and all of that?
Yeah, I come from Yorkshire. My dad was a coal miner, and I've always been interested in nature and how things change. I joined the Green Party when I was 14, and I have looked over many years about how things change and the nature of making change and the sort of nature of the problems in the world. So I've studied science, I've studied economics, I've studied social change theory. So I'm a bit of a nerd, really, in a way. And I came to the conclusion around 2010 that to make deep change was going to need mass civil disobedience. And it took me 6 years before I could start to really find the team to do that with. It took a deep spiritual practice, actually, a very extraordinary experience in Costa Rica with psychedelic medicines, which I can talk about. Like I say, and really a lot of research to reach the conclusion, which is an odd conclusion to reach, that a sane thing for me to do at the moment as a mother is to take a hammer and a chisel to a bank window and to a government window and to get as many people on the streets to raise their voices and get arrested and say that we'd had enough.
So as a mother here, is that the crucial bit? Is that just something which through your children, you realize that you have to do that for them and therefore
I think being a mother is a critical part of it, but not the only part. A mother's job, a parent's job, is to keep your child safe and to make sure they have a future. Our children aren't safe. They're swallowing the equivalent of a credit card of plastic every 2 weeks, which messes with the body's endocrine systems. Breast milk is full of things like dioxins, and your placenta dumps them into your baby. That's the only way you get rid of these forever chemicals, is by dumping them into babies. Still better to breastfeed, by the way. So you can't keep your children safe. What kind of parent does that make you? You can't give them a future when the climate system's so unstable. So for sure, being a mother helps you to focus on where your responsibility lies. And even before I was a mother, even as a child aged around 7 years old, when they started building on the playing fields that I like to play in, and there was never any consultation with the children, I felt some rage about that. And I felt my peace going running and being in the woodlands and things like that from where I'm from. So I feel like it's also partly about feeling connected with nature and knowing that something feels deeply unkind and uncaring in the world.
Can you, in simple terms, as much as possible, explain what is the idea of Extinction Rebellion and what kind of the movement is trying to achieve?
Sure. Yeah. So dial down the nerd, nerd head. Because this is the thing, you can look in history and, with both women here, the women's vote was at least partly achieved by the suffragettes, who broke windows, by the way. They said there's nothing more, Emmeline Pankhurst, the sort of leader of the suffragettes, said there's no greater argument in politics than that of the broken pane. That was the way you get attention, and then you get people on the streets. And there are sort of theories about what to do when and tactics and all that sort of stuff. But essentially, when you've got vested interests that are making sure that people either don't think about climate change or they even deny that it's true, you have to go outside of the ordinary to shake things up. And you have to build a social movement that has sort of simple demands that make sense to people. So Extinction Rebellion had 3 demands. One was that we wanted the truth to be told. We were in a dire situation and time was running out. The second one is that we had to set goals and halt the halt the biodiversity loss that we were facing on the planet and decarbonise our economies. And the third one was, well, how do you go about those things? Because they're going to impact everybody's life. Well, we're not here to say, well, you have to stop doing this or start doing that. We wanted ordinary people to decide. So we very much advocate for citizens' assemblies, which are when people come together and they listen to expertise and they make decisions. Well, yeah, how do we want to deal with flying or the food industry or whatever? And so we had those three demands. And what's interesting is we did burst onto the scenes in 2018 in the UK, and it spread to 75 countries. But by May 2019, the Parliament declared an emergency, as we'd said. The government set a net zero target of 2050, too late, but still set it in law. And one of the departments for business ran a citizens' assembly. It's on the BBC. You can watch it. So our demands have been to some extent met. Mm-hmm. And so the movement's in another phase, looking about what other things it needs to be doing. And there's been spin-offs like Just Stop Oil and Insulate Britain. And I started something called Money Rebellion. So there have been lots of different ways of keeping not only the message out there, but also looking at the deeper sort of systemic issues like the economic system that we have.
And did Extinction Rebellion ever work together with the government to achieve any of those? Has the government ever consulted you in any way? So has it always been a bit of a kind of...
Well, it's an interesting question, actually. Greta Thunberg said behind the scenes, people often say, carry on doing what you're doing. You know, Greta Thunberg got young people out of schools and onto the streets. And yeah, I've had civil servants say, you're making a difference. I've had people in the banking industry saying, we need you. You're helping my job as a person pushing for sustainability. We need you to keep doing what you're doing. But they won't say it in public. And so when you do acts of civil disobedience, you risk arrest. Sometimes you risk jail time. I myself was raided by the Metropolitan Police. They came and stayed in my hometown and knocked on my door, thumped on my door at 5:30 in the morning, handcuffed me and charged me with conspiracy and said that I was trying to bring down the finance system, which was quite a feat. And in the end, they didn't press charges. But my colleague, Roger Hallam, for example, is another co-founder. He's been charged with conspiring to commit a public nuisance along with 4 other colleagues, and he's been given 5 years in jail.
He's in jail currently?
Yeah, currently. And there are many other protesters in jail right now. So I went to face a jury of my peers, and I had to take a bag up to the dock because I literally had been threatened with being hauled away and taken to prison in that moment. And that happened to a friend of mine. So I was willing to go to jail. I certainly don't want to. Even spending 24 hours in a jail cell, it's quite tedious and you start to feel a bit nutty, But if you look in history, that's what it's taken to make change.
Can we talk about civil disobedience? Just again, kind of in simple terms, and for people who maybe don't understand it, what is it? How effective is it? Like, do we actually have historic examples? Well, you've given one, but let's just still talk through it, of the cases when it worked.
Yeah. I mean, I think civil disobedience is one of the tools in the toolkit of making change. And so it's not the only one. Other things have to happen as well. But what it does do is a number of things. One is, if you're finding it hard to get a topic discussed, if there's a sort of silence in, you can break through that silence by doing sort of weird things, really, like other colleagues have thrown soup at a Van Gogh painting and it had a plate glass on it. The painting was never going to get damaged, but it went viral. People were like, well, I wouldn't have done that. I agree with what they're saying, but I wouldn't have done that sort of thing. But they're talking about climate change, right? By the way, those 2 young women are in jail for 2 years now. They did £150 worth of damage, I think it was. And the judge that sent them down for 2 years, he's let off people with suspended sentences, people who've beaten up the police, and a police officer who had sex in the car with a drunk woman, things like that. It's very worrying that protesters being jailed like that. But let me say that I do know that those young women walked into that with that willing. And there is something, I think, in civil disobedience, and which is the moral force of saying, I'm going to do this no matter what you do to me, because it matters too much. And there's something that speaks to the public from that perspective. Of course, they're also trying to make people haters. I mean, another example would be the Indian independence movement led by Gandhi. He led a salt tax march where they took salt, and they'd been told they weren't allowed to, and made their own salt, and they were beaten up. And that was those images went across the world, and it shamed the British public. There was a similar type of things in the civil rights movement in the States. Closer to home, the gay rights movement, ACT UP, started in America, I think, but was here as well. We sort of copied a lot of their methodology that has helped gay people to have more rights than, in the face of terrible homophobia. Genetically modified crops were being introduced into this country. People pulled them up, and they made a brochure about how to pull them up so that we wouldn't have GM crops. And even the then Prince Charles shared that brochure with other people. So it has a historic tradition, civil disobedience, and it also has a literature. People write about why it works, what different things to try, and different tactics and so on. So I suppose what is maybe important to say is that there are different types of things that need to happen, and they are increasingly difficult. So the kind of civil disobedience that gets a subject talked about by disrupting the public, by doing strange things like doing things at a sporting event or whatever, that can push through new ideas or ideas that are being suppressed. So that's idea of power. Another thing you can do with your body is use your physical body to say no. So imagine if somebody was going to attack your family, would you put your body in the way, right? My family includes the trees that I hold beloved, and many climate activists have lived in trees to stop them from being cut down. That's a physical use of your body to say no. The other one that's most important to do and is hardest is economic power. So that can include boycotts and sanctions, strikes. For example, at the minute, I'm not paying an aspect of my water bill. The reason why the Met Police thought I was trying to bring down the finance system is that part of Money Rebellion was getting people to take out a credit card and give the money to Survival International, who work with Indigenous people, and then tell Barclays Bank, we're not paying you back. So that got me raided by the Met Police, that and some window breaking. So, but you have to find a way to pressurise people economically as well to make the change. That's what really pushes things into new territory.
Particularly with the civil disobedience, like actions like with the Van Gogh painting and stuff like that, quite a lot of times, again on the internet and stuff, you would hear people saying, well, or just in the discussions with other people, the argument would be, how is that? Yes, you attract attention, but why don't you go and go after British Petroleum building, or stop a G7 summit? Or
we've done all of that as well.
Okay.
We've literally done all of the above. Goodness. And actually, why haven't you heard about that? Because it doesn't get the coverage. That's why the Van Gogh painting gets the coverage. It's not always about the coverage. Sometimes if you go to a particular institution and you do a direct action there, you do some kind of, whether it's window breaking or occupying that building or whatever, you're also speaking to the staff there. And what a company wants is for the staff to feel proud of who they work for and to feel motivated to work for that company. And when you're exposing the fact that a certain company is destroying the planet, like, how do the staff feel about that? People do talk to me behind the scenes, So a former vice chairman of one of the major high street banks said to me, well, the chairman of the bank, the chief executive of the bank, really wanted to make change faster, but he couldn't within the economic system that we live in. I was like, well, my goodness, when I broke the window of your bank, I was saying, please, could you come out and admit the fact that the economic system incentivizes you to harm the planet? You are incentivized to do that. But he wouldn't say it in public, you see. He'll say it to me in a Chatham House meeting. I did have Mark Carney, who was the former governor of the Bank of England. He was giving Reith lectures on the BBC. And I was invited to ask a question. And one of the first things he said was, well, the most important thing at the minute, or one of the important things at the minute, are social movements, because they help make the change, or help make the change possible. And he publicly thanked me, and I'd just broken a window, right? So these are part of the things that you're dealing with, is this kind of cognitive dissonance of people saying this isn't the right thing, but also public figures admitting at times that that's what's needed.
Oh, I wonder, why do you choose civil disobedience, for example, over, you could have gone to, because you were 14, I think, when you joined Green Party. You could have continued with, for example, career of a politician, kind of, trying to push some reforms and do things that way. Why do you choose?
Well, why do you not think I'm doing that as well, though? That's many climate activists.
Yeah, I guess are
also members of the Green Party, and they'll door knock for the Green Party or possibly a different political party. Yeah, and of course I have friends who do that work as well. So we're all over it. We've written to the MPs, we've been on the marches, we've done a lot. So this is an escalation in tactics, really. It's like, what else does this need? And we've had a lot of support from people like Caroline Lucas, who was a preeminent Green MP who's just stepped down, because she feels like she's going to make a bigger difference outside of Parliament, actually.
Do you think civil disobedience acts like that? Do you think they encourage criminal behaviour?
Criminal behaviour?
Yeah.
No. I just absolutely don't own a label of being a criminal, Criminality would be seen as sort of antisocial, even though there might be socio-economic reasons why people are doing it. If they're breaking into somebody's house and stealing things. I'm pro-social. I'm here to try and protect society. And society is in a slow car crash. And when people say, well, look at the disruption you've caused, and then next minute, entire bridges have collapsed, cities are flooded, the food production is dropped. It's the worst production ever this year by the farmers. These kinds of things are happening. All we're doing is raising the alarm, really. We're saying, hello, people, can you wake up and face what's happening? And I actually think the deeper purpose of civil disobedience these days is to find as many willing people to wake up to what we're in, to face it and feel it, and go through that process, which is not easy, because it's you can feel real despair, and you can feel a lot of grief for the loss of life, the extinction. We're in the 6th mass extinction event. Life on Earth is dying. What does it mean to face and feel that? But if you go through that process of feeling it, and you go through an internal process that says, I'm here to show up in this wild and precious life that I have. I'm not here for long. What am I going to do? Am I just going to stay in sort of consumer capitalism, trying to keep myself, distracted with the nonsense? Or do I want to show up somehow? And in that way, there's a deep sort of purposefulness that you can find in activism as well. And you find other people that feel the same way and carry on thinking about what these times require. And it's that kind of person that have also supported us through the worst. Like when the pandemic hit, there were mutual aid networks that sprang up. We're going to have, the climate science and the wider science suggests a pandemic every year. The food systems will collapse. There'll be going to be great pressures on us and where we work and how we are together. And so the majority of us, the more of us that have faced that, and so that when it happens, you're not shocked. I'll give you a sort of slightly different example. When I wanted to start mass civil disobedience, I thought about it a lot, and I pictured getting attacked in the press, and I pictured being raided by the police. So when it happened, it wasn't surprising. Somebody photographed me in the supermarket buying lemons, and they made a double-page story about it. Hypocrisy of buying lemons,
I did want to ask you about that, because there were things like, you've been not accused. That's kind of like, basically there has been a conversations about kind of double standards, because you drive a diesel car, you were flying to conferences.
No, I didn't fly to any.
You haven't fly. You didn't fly.
With the car thing, it's like I bought the very greenest car I could at that time with the money that I had available. The sort of electric cars at that time were so much more expensive. And the advice is to stay with the car that you've got. I couldn't afford an electric car now. Could probably get a second-hand one, but it's to stay with the one you have until that one runs out, because the carbon emissions to create a new electric car. Anyway, yada yada, right? The thing is, the right-wing press don't really care what I'm driving. They don't care whether I'm buying lemons or not. They just want to try and discredit the movement by discrediting me. That's what really is going off. And actually, if you're trying to be perfect as an individual, you put yourself under a lot of stress. I'm a mum, go to the supermarket, I'm trying to work out what my children will eat, what my body feels like it needs, what I can afford, whether it's organic, whether it's locally produced, etc. I've got a list as long as my arm of good things that I've done in the world, but I also have things that aren't ideal as well. Nobody's really interested in what you do as an individual. If they just want to sort of shame you publicly, that's what they're going to do. So I'm just in that way not really pushing the idea that individual change is going to make all the difference, but you just do what you can within your own integrity and in your own in life circumstances. I live in a town where it's very hilly and there's very little public transport and that sort of thing. So I mostly cycle, actually.
I do agree in a sense that political change has to happen rather than we should blame each person on choosing lemons in the supermarket. I also wonder if with your actions with Extinction Rebellion, with Extinction Rebellion actions, do you think that it kind of it makes people dismiss the climate change and more focus on what you're doing?
No, what it does is it gets the vested interests to realise that you're a threat to their vested interests, gets them to write reports like there's one called Extinction Rebellion that I feature quite heavily in as a so-called extremist. That was that organisation that wrote that, Policy Exchange. They're funded by oil and gas interests. They've written laws that have been taken word by word and passed by Parliament, right, by a right-wing government. So that's what happens. That's why these sort of pushbacks come at you, is because you're a threat to the powers that be.
Why do you think we should act when Extinction Rebellion, for example, is telling us that it's kind of already too late?
Well, it's important to face the fact that we signed up to this Paris climate agreement, which said we should stay as close as possible to 1.5 degrees of warming. And yet there isn't a government in the world that has got policies that are doing that. The governments of the world are planning to produce more than double the fossil fuels that we should be doing. So government policy and what they say is way off. And there have been changes off the back of activism. There have been a number of banks that have said that they won't be funding new fossil fuels, for example, and the current government in the UK has said they won't do new oil and gas licensing beyond which are already there. And of course, we're trying to get them to reverse some of those. But I think it's important to really face the times that we're in and still try and mitigate for the harm. Everything matters now, everything matters. And at the same time, we have to plan, which is adaptation to what's coming. So both things need to happen. I think, one of the things that the vested interest did was to try and push people into a sense of despair. So they kept saying, don't do it yet, because, you're going to damage the economy. The economy is the thing that's doing the damage, by the way. But don't do it yet. Oh, it's too late. There was never the right moment to do anything.
But kind of the harm that has been done is irreversible anyway. So that, I think, it makes people feel like, well, we can't now undo anything. So
I think there's almost a comfort in that, though. Oh, it's just too late, so I don't need to bother. Well, it's not too late to make the harm less bad, and it's not too late to plan and make change so that as the harm increases, we can break together, is what my friend Professor Jen Bendel calls it. How do we break together better? Because do you want to be in a sort of Mad Max scenario where people are eating their dogs or whatever and running around shooting each other? Or do you want to be in a community that's faced up to the difficulties that are here and going to get worse, and have actually socially prepared together and are starting to build together the alternative systems that we need, I think humanity could rise phoenix-like from this terrible period that we're in, and that young people could figure out what changes they want to see at this time and what's theirs to do. It's a time when great changes will be made. They have to be made. They could be made in the direction of deciding who lives and dies, and, extreme authoritarian measures. Women's rights are already being rolled back, that's probably a good analogy in a way. You watch what's happening to women's rights. They've been fought for years. You're just going to go, oh, well, it's already too late. You're going to fight for your autonomy as a woman, for your right to exist in the world, for your right to be safe. Of course, it's not too late to be a human being in a time of great distress. And really, I think that's what we're being asked to do, is to wake up and to be alive to what the problems are and to find out what's ours to do.
There is this kind of conversation that the climate change, in a way, is quite middle-class white people thing, because a lot of people, around the world are struggling with so many other aspects of life, and with much kind of I guess basic everyday things like, I don't know, a lot of people are struggling, to find needs to fill, to feed, food, water, education, doesn't have access to it. What are your thoughts about that? How do you feel about it?
Well, I think that's a really important point, because they all have the same root cause. So that it's not different issues, it's the same issues. Climate change is in part caused by deep inequality in the world. There are a handful of people that own the vast majority of the wealth in the world, and they are the biggest emitters of carbon dioxide and other fossil fuels by a long way. There's a few corporations that are doing most damage, right? And it's that same system that's hoarding money and supporting the cost of living, so-called cost of living crisis. It's not a thing that's happening by accident. It's generated by the economic system that we live in. And so what I've noticed, again, I think there was a headline just in the last few days when as we're filming this, from one of the right-wing newspapers that say, no, people don't care about climate, they care about the cost of living crisis. And it's like, well, if that newspaper was doing its job, it would be drawing the connections for people between those two things. And when we've been in times of war as a nation, what you have to do is pull together and decide how you're going to get through this together. You had no choice. It was an existential threat. The only thing is now that the elites aren't admitting that it's an existential threat. And so what they're doing is carrying on pitting us against each other. As an environmentalist, I will be pitted against working class people. Actually, my dad was a coal miner, right? So I really care about a just transition. I really care about people's jobs and well-being in their community, because I went through the miners' strike myself. I've suffered the hands of an extractive system and been part of that fossil fuel economy. I think it's the same issue that we're facing, and we need to really not be divided and ruled, and to see that we've actually got common cause, and that it's in the interest of the elites to divide and rule us.
In terms of civil disobedience and the actions, is there a line where you won't cross? Is there something you won't do?
Well, I suppose you enter in the territory of discussing violence, really, and therein lies an interesting question about what defines violence. So I wrote the principles and values for Extinction Rebellion, and one of them is that we're a non-violent movement. And so when we do things, we take accountability for what we've done. We stand next to the broken pane of glass, etc. And I don't consider that an act of violence. I consider it an act of love. Somebody else might choose to define that as violence. If you were at home and your house was on fire and you were trapped and I broke the door down to get you out, you wouldn't say that's an act of violence, right? You would understand the reason why I did that. There are parts of the movements that undertake sabotage. So you've had people that have tried to destroy pipelines and things like that. I'm personally in favour of sabotage as well, in the same way that if there were gas chambers that were being developed and train lines to them and people being taken in and killed, like I would feel like it was completely appropriate to destroy the train line. You know, I believe that sabotage is something that people could do as well. I'm not very good at putting up shelves, so I'm not sure I know how to break a train line, but I wouldn't rule it out, no.
Do people ever act without Extinction Rebellion sanctions, or do you always know who kind of protests and does what? Because I'm imagining, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm imagining that the movement spread so much that maybe it's hard to control what's happening.
Well, this is the beauty of a decentralized movement. So I mentioned I'd written the principles and values. There's 10 of them, which include that we want to act from a regenerative culture. We want to be well together. We don't want to burn ourselves out. One is that we're accountable for our actions, that we're non-violent, that we debrief and reflect and learn. We've just done something. Was it the right thing? How did it go? The 10th principle and value says you can do anything as Extinction Rebellion if you follow these principles and values. So everybody's liberated to act. So it's not like every single action that everybody ever does, you think, oh, that was great, well done. You know, occasionally you might think, oh, that's a bit embarrassing, or that wasn't, I wouldn't have done it like that. But it doesn't matter. Like, people need to be liberated. That's how you free up a social movement to act without a sort of a controlling centre.
And do you think Extinction Rebellion will ever achieve its goals?
No. No.
Why?
Because it's too late, and because it's time for the civil disobedience movements to move on, in my view, and prepare for collapse, and to find a way for those moments of collapse to be a time for humanity to renew itself. So I started working on strategy a few years ago, been thinking with other people, and what part of the climate movements are doing now are building local assemblies to help us to decide together. Because think about it, when a community is under a lot of pressure, there's not enough food, and you've got to think about how to meet the times that you're in. Like, maybe the food shelves aren't going to stock up again. What are you going to do? Like, how are you going to keep your community safe? Assemblies are really good ways of doing that. And there are models in other countries, like in Rojava in northern Syria. The assemblies were part of West African culture for many, many centuries, etc. Like, there's a model here. We're not inventing it. So we're trying to build for the times that are coming. We're still trying to stop the harm and minimise the harm. I also dug a pond for my 50th birthday. You know, there's good things that you can do that help to regenerate nature. Never give up, folks. When I say it's not going to meet its goals, it also sort of has, to some extent. It's done what it can. We've already had assemblies. We've changed the narrative. So I'm proud of what we've achieved. But I wouldn't want anybody to sit thinking that we're twiddling our thumbs or giving up, or we're not able to really face the nature of the problem that we're in. Predicament, actually.
It feels, and again, absolutely personal view, but it does feel that in the last kind of several years, the momentum has been slightly gone for Extinction Rebellion.
Yeah.
Do you feel that way?
Yeah.
And if so, what is it, do you think? Is this like a natural thing for a movement like that to kind of go into waves?
Yeah. I personally have slightly stepped to the side with Extinction Rebellion. I've been working on something called Being the Change. Mm-hmm. XR has done two main things. I'm talking about the UK. I mean, I that's where my focus is. Other things happen in other countries, and there's amazing things being happening in the Netherlands. So, I'm speaking here I'm speaking here about the UK, not for the UK. But I think we had our sort of honeymoon period in 2019, and we did some big changes there. XR at the moment is focused on two main things, really. One is pushing the idea that we need to have an upgrade to democracy. To highlight the fact that this kind of democratic system is not really working, it's easy to capture, and that assemblies of ordinary people make better decisions. So we're pushing that with many other groups, and a global citizens' assembly is already being run. There's change happening in that place. It's a good thing to keep a push on. And then the other thing is that in terms of, this terrible economic system that keeps pushing forwards and destroying the planet, in order to build these destructive projects, they have to be insured. So Extinction Rebellion in the UK has a focus on the insurance sector, saying, do you really want to insure this project, like the Adani coal mine or like the ECOP, in East Africa, a coal and oil, a pipeline, basically. And insurance companies can be quite small, and it's easier to put pressure on them. So you won't see as much of that activity, but we're targeting quite sort of with the energy that we have in that way. My personal energy has been also to look at internationalism and the story of the Global South in this, because often our movements will look at the Global South and talk about our family there as victims of the climate crisis. They've done very little to create this crisis, and they're the ones that are having the most immediate impacts, and that's obviously deeply unfair. And that narrative is therefore correct, but also there's a rising up happening in the Global South. So I did fly recently, and I don't normally actually. I was invited by a delegation to go to West Africa and be with the decolonial struggles there. And it's very interesting because we talk about a just transition, which means that you're going to do a transition in a way that doesn't impact family in the Global South, working class people, etc. Well, family in the Global South have started to say, we're not paying colonial debts. They're outrageous. And you're not having our stuff for next to no money. And they've thrown out decolonial powers, and they're talking about creating their own currency as well. Those moments will create, if they're powerful enough, vast change across the world. But what will happen in our name is that those countries that are decolonising at the minute will be attacked. I'm talking about people like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to see how much the people are behind that struggle right now and what change that could make in the world as well. So I think for us to notice as well, you've got brilliant climate leadership in Colombia under Petros. It's not all doom and gloom. It's not just about us in the global north. It's about being part of a wider family.
Have your ideology changed over time? And if so, why?
That's an interesting question. I guess I sort of try not to. I don't tend to adopt a particular label for myself because I think people read those labels in a particular way. I am more interested in saying let's have a grown-up conversation about economics than saying I'm an anti-capitalist, because people will think that means you hate business or markets, even though that's not what it means, by the way. So I'm interested in the emergent economics of degrowth, for example, which leads with the idea that we should have universal basic service provision. That's what we need to do. So that's what part we have to do is, as the collapse happens, is start to create our own service provision. Happened in Greece in austerity times. We can do this, folks, right? So I have deepened my understanding. And I suppose the bit that I've maybe not said very much about is that I think there's a mystical side to all of this. There's something that deepens in me that's trying to be in a dialogue with life's consciousness. My friend calls himself a mystical anarchist. That might be the nearest label that I'd think about adopting. So how is life's intelligence speaking through us? And, you know, why would a species destroy life on Earth? What is going off for us? And so I spend a lot of time, you know, reading papers on brain science and about systems and that kind of thing. So for me, it's much more of an inquiry into the why rather than I am this label, I have this ideology. Essentially, I believe in freedom. And I don't think you can be free in a system of extraction. The only people who get to be sort of free are the people with all the money, you know, but it's not, we're not free. I believe in freedom, and I believe in the power of community. And I believe that in some level of fairness, you know, and I kind of feel like human beings can only create the systems that reflect how well we are. So a place that you have some agency is your own well-being, you know, your own response to the world. Like, can we notice where we're in fear responses or shut down, you know, and can we keep staying with the aliveness of life?
I guess one kind of last one I wanted to ask you is, I mean, I mean, I have a child. She's very young, but I do obviously think about her future a lot. But I also talk to young people a lot because of work and everything. And I know their outlook on life is different. I know they do care. I do believe that they care, and I do believe that they have quite a different kind of way they look at things. And I know that a lot of them are worried, and I know that a lot of them are quite anxious. And so I wonder if there is anything if like someone from, let's call them Gen Z, kind of younger people watching this, is there anything we can tell them, kind of one advice or something we can give them, or kind of one thought we can give them that can be maybe hopeful for them, or something that they can take, further and kind of feel good about their future, right?
Yeah. Well, let's start with a hard thing. The times that we're in and that are coming will, I think, inevitably have great difficulty. The collapse of civilization is not a walk in the park. But the civilization that we live in has been created from a diseased way of being in the world, from an ill culture, from an extraction from the planet and from people. And it needs to go. So what are we going to put in its place, folks? How do you want to be the change? Like, what do you want to birth in your life? There will be opportunities to make change for that generation, whether it's in how communities come together, whether it's how where we grow food, whether it's how we take care of our well-being and our health. Different kinds of companies like the B corporations, that come up with positive ways to capture carbon in nature. There's so many cool things out there to get involved in. It's really a process, I think, of finding your purpose, because the facade of the system that we live in is falling away. It's not a real democracy. Young people don't have a future in this system. Housing so expensive, pensions aren't going to exist. But as that facade falls away, like, what opportunities are there to make that change? I think that's what really needs to be focused on. Don't see it as purely a negative. See what wants to be born at this time, and come together and find your purpose. Yeah.
That's really nice. Thank you. We probably haven't covered hundreds of things. do you feel like there's something you, like, I don't know, you wanted to add, or maybe something I didn't ask you, or something you wanted to say?
I think because it's young people, do you want me to tell this psychedelic story?
Yeah, tell us the psychedelic story. Yeah, we're all in for a psychedelic story. It's because I guess there is kind of, I guess spirituality is a hard thing, because you kind of, on one hand, if you're into it, you're into it, but if you're not, you're kind of not, maybe. So it's quite hard maybe to connect to people on that subject, but.
Well, spirituality is an interesting topic, and it's a word, isn't it? It's got baggage, and it's not necessarily the best word. But there's a brain scientist that I'm really interested in, a psychiatrist called Dr. Ian McGilchrist, who's reviewed 5,000 science papers. So you can come at it from a very scientific perspective, like, what's the nature of consciousness? There's a fantastic TED talk by Jill Bolte Taylor, My Stroke of Insight. And what happens in that is that her left hemisphere has a stroke, not cool, right? But her left hemisphere in her brain is closed down, and her right is more online. And the left hemisphere is like your PR department. It's trying to keep you feeling okay about yourself. And it's the place where anger comes, and it tries to make quick decisions when you're stressed. So, like, say there was a rustling in the bushes. Is that, your child, or is it a tiger coming to eat you, or is it some food? Like, you've got to quickly make a decision. So the left hemisphere is good. It decides how to put into action our vision. But it's the right that has this ability to connect to life. When Jill Bolte Taylor had her stroke, she had that experience of being all of creation, all of nature. And people that work with psychedelic medicines have had that kind of experience. I've gone with the psychedelic medicines, and you have to take great care about who you work with, etc. Just health warning, folks. to try and answer questions and try and move things forwards in the social movements. And it's been very miraculous, actually. And I do feel like there's I don't understand fully how it works, but there's some wider consciousness and wider intelligence in life. Some people call it the cosmic hologram. And again, there's some physics here. It's not just some like hippie la la land. We know that life's sort of made up of more of information, and that feels increasing. Is there a way to be in connection with the information? Well, I could get all theoretical about it, but almost in a way, if you've tried to start Mass Civil Disobedience for like 6 years and you've got nowhere, threw myself at the mercy of something higher than myself and said, please help, where are my team? I really need to meet my second person. What do I not know? What are the codes for social change? Because Terence McKenna, this great sort of psychonaut, said the codes in the higher consciousness. What are codes? Yeah, come on then. Mm-hmm. Tell me how we make social change happen. And what's in the way of me, right? And I went on this retreat, and I had to go overseas because, legalities and stuff. But I had a very deep internal healing. And some of this is described in more detail online if you want to look this up. But a very deep internal healing. And I was also shown really awful side to myself, which is quite self-righteous. Right? And that's a common thing in activism, right? And I think it's the thing that people react to. These activists that think they're better than everybody else. Mm-hmm. I was being shown that kind of competitive, petty, and obviously it comes from a place where you don't feel good about yourself. So it needs care and healing. And one of the principles and values in Extinction Rebellion is no blaming and shaming. Like we're all the same. We're all human beings. We're all flawed. We're all doing our best, right? So that was beautiful. And the prayers were answered. They were really very deeply answered, to the point that within a month of making these prayers, I'd met Roger Hallam, and he'd done some research at King's College on civil disobedience theory. I'd got some in the bag, but he'd done a lot more, actually. It was really important. I went off and got some extra training. We all put it in the mix in the end. So I met this guy. I thought, I'm going to be working with this person. Met my team. 4-hour intense meeting. And I was like, God, this is exactly what I needed to know. 4 hours later, and he taps my notepad and says, well, basically, Gail, what I've just given you here are the codes for social change, right? Exactly what I'd asked for. You're like, wow. And then we built this social movement, and it happened. And so I've been in that prayer field quite often. Please help me. And it feels like you get tested. Did you really mean this? So it's not like kind of, I'd like an electric car and it lands, or like there's something in you that has to keep growing. And I think that the intelligence of life wants to come back through humanity. Like we're meant to be here. We're a beautiful species. Like the indigenous people, they don't live in biodiversity. They create biodiversity by how they live. Like we're what we call a keystone species. We make life more beautiful. The only time we don't do that is when we're living in a disease culture, when we're not well. And that disease culture, it's dying. So that's what I mean. Like find, whether you want to call it a spiritual path or whatever language you want to use, find your way to be in this wild and crazy life, and find your purpose. That's always what I want to say to people. Don't be held back by the misinformation, the miseducation in this system, and find your way to keep connecting with that spirit of life. And you'll feel. I mean, the menopause at the minute is awful. It's challenging, the change, but then. You get taken down on your knees, and you have to kind of keep standing up and walking. You find other people. You can never do this on your own. That's part of the thing. We've got to find each other and love each other through these times. It calls for our better selves. That's what I want to say about these times.
So maybe we just all need to take psychedelics, and that will kind of heal us all as a humanity.
People get God complexes on psychedelics, so, like setting folks. But they're also very powerful breath practices. There are many other things, some subtle things for your day to day, But yeah, I am an advocate. I'm not saying they're for everybody, but I'm an advocate of that. You're really with the plants and the medicines of the land, you know. The land starts to speak to you.